Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
A disabled refugee who was beaten to death and set alight by his neighbour in Bristol 4 years ago was repeatedly failed by Avon and Somerset police. That's the conclusion of the Independent Police Complaints Commission, who say officers ignored Bijan Ebrahimi's pleas for help. The commission said there was evidence that racial bias at the force affected the officers' response. John Kay reports.
4 years on, and tonight the sisters of Bijan Ebrahimi have some more answers. They've been told their vulnerable younger brother was repeatedly failed by police in the years before he was murdered, treated as a nuisance, not as a victim.
Reading that report, it was devastating.
They say the list of failings has shocked them.
It was so hard to see Bijan all these years been suffering and his voice never listened to.
He always thought that he is in a country that police is there to protect people.
Don't you dare take pictures of me, all right?
Today's report says Bijan didn't just fear for his life in the days before he was murdered by this neighbour, Lee James, but that he'd called police repeatedly from a number of addresses over several years, asking for help.
You've got a mob outside my door.
But time and time again, he was ignored.
What part of be quiet do you not understand? Shut up!
Today's report runs to hundreds of pages, and it says this whole case has laid bare what it calls the disrespect, the prejudice and even contempt with which some officers and staff treated Bijan Ebrahimi in the days before he was murdered here. Last year, PC Kevin Duffy and community support officer Andrew Passmore were jailed after being convicted of misconduct in a public office. PC's Leanne Winter and Helen Harris were cleared by the jury, but were later sacked by a misconduct hearing. Bijan's family have raised questions about racism within the force.
There are some hallmarks of discrimination that could be construed as race hatred. There are overwhelming elements of evidence that indicate this was discrimination against a very vulnerable man.
Avon and Somerset police say this case has already prompted major changes.
We accept that we failed Bijan Ebrahimi at his time of greatest need, and throughout that time he was respectful and he had confidence and trust in us, the police, and we let him down, and for that we are sorry.
In this city, known for its tolerance, tonight many questions remain. And 4 years after the murder of Bijan Ebrahimi, there is still another major report from the council yet to come. John Kay, BBC News, Bristol.
First, a story we have been covering for a number of years. We failed him in his hour of need. You heard it in the headlines. The verdict of Avon and Somerset's police chief into his force's treatment of a refugee who was murdered by his neighbour. Bijan Ebrahimi had repeatedly reported death threats and racial abuse to police before he was beaten to death. Today, the police watchdog, the IPCC, found officers consistently ignored his pleas for help because they believed he was lying. It also said they may have been biased against him because of his race. Our Home Affairs correspondent Andy Davis has this from Bristol.
The more we learn about the story of Bijan Ebrahimi, the bleaker the picture gets. Another window now opens on the life of this Iranian refugee on an estate in Bristol and the years of abuse and persecution he endured before his murder.
Though it's very difficult to say this, we let down Bijan Ebrahimi at the time he needed us most, and for that we are unreservedly sorry.
Today the police watchdog spoke of the bear pit environment to which Mr. Ebrahimi was exposed in the days before his death, sparked when a neighbour, Lee James, mistakenly thought Mr. Ebrahimi was trying to film his children.
Don't you dare take pictures of me, all right?
You come to my house.
I come to your house, don't take pictures of me then, all right?
Go out of my house.
Get away with the pictures, all right?
Go out of my house.
Instead of the aggressor, Lee James, being arrested, it was Mr. Ebrahimi who was taken to custody. The way he was treated by some officers, not just unfair, said the IPCC, but done so with disrespect, prejudice and even contempt.
What part of be quiet do you not understand? Shut up!
The treatment of him was humiliating and degrading, concludes the IPCC, devoid also of any meaningful risk assessment, as he returned to his estate alone, increasingly afraid and pleading with the police for help.
What's going on right now?
Right now, a few of the neighbors outside and shouting and calling me pedophile.
We'll get someone to you as soon as they're available, okay?
Over the course of 4 days, Bijan Ebrahimi called Avon and Somerset police 20 times. But within an hour of his last call, Lee James had beaten him to death, dragged him across the estate, doused him in white spirit, and left his body to burn. A significant number of opportunities to help Mr. Ebrahimi, said the IPCC, had been missed.
No matter how many times he was rebuffed, mocked, dismissed, dealt with contempt, he never lost faith and trust in Avon and Somerset police. And that is the most poignant, salutary lesson for Avon and Somerset police. He kept faith with them. They let him down every step of the way, and they let him down so badly that final weekend.
Bijan Ebrahimi was vulnerable, but he was repeatedly dismissed and disbelieved by the police. And what's so shocking is just how often it's now transpired he went to them for help. Because it goes all the way back to 2007, when at his home here, he had his front door daubed with the word pervert by those who'd wrongly labelled him a paedophile. The litany of abuse he reported both here and at his next address spanned years. He reported threats to kill him, arson attacks, being racially abused, assaulted, rocks thrown at his door, his beloved flowers cut, more racial abuse, spat on, punched, his cat attacked, rocks thrown on his head, year after year telling the police of abuse, threats and assaults. 73 times Bijan Ebrahimi reported crimes it's emerged to Avon and Somerset police, but on at least 40 of those occasions the force failed to record a crime. There were routine failures to apply their hate crime policy, emboldening no doubt those targeting Mr. Ebrahimi.
I can reassure the public that we have transformed ourselves. We accept these findings. We're not standing here saying we haven't got anything to learn. This was an unfortunate set of circumstances. It wasn't. We let down Bijan Ebrahimi when he needed us most, and he always continued to have faith in us.
But you let him down your force let him down over years, not just when he needed you most. Is there a problem culturally with your force in terms of dealing with repeat victims?
I think we failed to identify that he was a repeat victim and the risk that he presented.
But is this an institutional problem?
What we would say is policing is done by people. So we've had to look hard at how we lead and supervise. There's a leadership programme we've put in place, led by our Chief Constable personally. But more importantly, what we've tried to understand is, why did that thinking happen?
That he was treated differently to his neighbours, the police say was due in part to unconscious bias, something they say they're addressing. The IPCC says racial bias may have been a factor. Bijan Ebrahimi's family are certain it was. Why do you think he was ignored and dismissed on so many occasions, spanning so many years?
I think his race was the main factor. He was living within an area with so many white people. He calls the police to get help. He's the one who gets arrested. Every time he tried to establish something and try to tell them that he is in danger or he needs help, he's the one who always to blame.
2 police staff have been jailed in this case, others sacked. Now let others take note, say Bijan Ebrahimi's family, of what can happen when the cries of the vulnerable are ignored.
This reporting.
In the last few years of his life, a life he chose to make in Britain, Bijan Ebrahimi, a disabled refugee from Iran, made more than 80 calls to the police asking for help. In most, he reported that he had been racially abused, threatened, or had had his property damaged. Police failed to record around half of these as crimes, and that, a report said today, was because the police themselves showed racial bias towards him. Their failure to act eventually cost him his life, beaten to death by a neighbour.
What part of be quiet do you not understand? Shut up!
Failed over and over again by the very people he believed were there to help him. Bijan Ebrahimi was the victim, treated like a suspect. He was consistently and systematically let down. He complained of being abused and was disbelieved, considered to be a liar and a nuisance.
No, I'm talking to you as a friend.
No, you're not my friend, that's the point. I'm a police officer, you're a pain in the ass. Don't speak to me.
The IPCC found more than 40 occasions over 7 years when police failed to record a crime after the 44-year-old complained. And yet his family say he kept hope that the law would one day support him.
This is the way Bijan was. He always kept his faith in the policing and he never lost his trust in them. But unfortunately, they didn't recognise that. They didn't recognise his needs.
You come to my house.
I come to your house, don't take pictures of me there, alright?
Go out of my house.
Bijan Ebrahimi was murdered by his neighbour Lee James. The violent and brutal end to his life came despite repeated pleas for help to police in the days and hours leading up to his death.
We failed Bijan Ebrahimi and his family. However, what's important is we recognise that, we're committed to learning, and as I say, we've put significant changes in place.
The IPCC found that the police's dealings with the vulnerable refugee showed a racial bias. As a result, officers here in Bristol, where Bijan Ebrahimi desperately sought help, are now trained to combat their own unconscious bias.
We've had a root and branch look at how we respond, and we've put vulnerability and the protection of vulnerable people right at the heart of everything we do.
But Bijan's family fear that changing police culture will take time.
I think the racial problem in the force is a systematic problem. It would take years. It's not something that is going to happen today and tomorrow, maybe next year. They have to work on it, and they have to take it very seriously.
Would you like to apologise? PC Kevin Duffy and Police Community Support Officer Andrew Passmore were jailed for misconduct over their dealings with Bijan Ebrahimi. 2 more were dismissed from the force. His family feel justice has finally been served, but far, far too late. Rupert Evelyn, News at 10, Bristol.